In less than 1 year from now, there will be new European Parliament elections, which will determine who will be leading the EU for the next 4 years. On this special edition, we will be looking at the youth aspect of the upcoming elections, as well as Jewish youth activism today in Europe. Today in the studio, I'm joined by Italian member of the European Parliament, Marco Campomenosi. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
And Juan Caldes, who is the EU Affairs Officer at the European Jewish Association.
Thank you for having me here today.
My name is Rebecca Guaba, and this is the European Report. Juan, thanks again for joining us. Let me start with you. It is no secret that the youth participation in the EU elections, national elections, has historically been very low. Why is the concept, in your opinion, of the European Union not attractive to young people today?
I wouldn't say maybe that perhaps it's not attractive, is that in this case, young people like us take for granted voting nowadays because we were born incredibly privileged and fortunate to live at a time in which, as I said, we take things for granted because 80 years ago, our great-grandparents had to fight in order for us to have a free world. Whereas nowadays, we take it for granted because we go into an election and think, okay, I'm just gonna go in there and I'm just gonna vote. But again, for me, it is really, really important to never take that for granted because I always say this, gaining your freedom, it is extremely, extremely difficult and losing it is very easily. So when it comes to the youth priorities, it is interesting because a recent survey showed that protection of the environment, integration of refugees is far more important than democratic participation for young people because of the reasons I stipulated. But at the same time, I think that many people nowadays feel very proud to be European. And that's due to the working and studying and touristic opportunities that we have nowadays in order to move freely across the EU. Also, the better knowledge of foreign languages that we have and the average of formal education that there is available all across Europe. It is one of those things that, again, we should feel very fortunate about. And again, we shouldn't take it for granted. And quite on the contrary, be very fortunate and lucky and grateful to live in such a great place like in Europe and to have the European Union, which at the end of the day, it's a big family in which we can have our differences, but we have a common mission and we have shared values, and that's what should unite us, and we should focus more on what unites us than rather when it divides us.
Thank you, Juan. Mr. Campomenosi, thank you for joining us and hosting us here. Can the EU and the European Parliament do anything to change this?
The European institutions are making a lot, spending a lot of money to communicate with the young people, but in some cases this has not brought a solution to the fact that young people in our countries does not feel in the center of the interest of the politicians. Maybe the political parties are not the good instrument also to speak to them, and they don't understand, they don't like political parties and leaders fighting between themselves. They don't understand for which reasons, in some cases, priorities seem not to be the ones looking forward the future, but protecting areas or interests or categories which where normally young people has not a relevant role. So for this reason, I think we all together would have to make efforts, and the European institution, and especially the European Parliament, would need to open a bit the possibility to accept different ideas, because I have the impression that in some cases when I propose a different future for Europe, I am interpreted as I am someone against Europe. That's totally not true. So to have a debate which is more open, I think that could help also people. I joined Lega when I was 16 years old. But this was a moment at the end of the so-called First Republic in Italy where my party was proposing something really new, where there was a hope of change. And I think the young people needs something new for which to spend their time to fight in a good way, of course, to have a future in another way, to have hope in the future for a continent which have many difficulties.
Yes, and I want to take an opportunity to shortly address the current affairs. And Juan, you're Spanish, and these are the first days of the Spanish presidency of the Council of the European Union. What should we expect then? What is perhaps your personal wish list that the Spanish presidency could bring to the European process?
So first is first. For those who may not know, Spain assumed the presidency of the Council on July 1st until December 31st. And our current president, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, already announced that the 4 priorities are going to be reindustrializing the EU, meaning not to be so dependent on other countries, which we did see now with the current ongoing war that it's taking place in Ukraine, and not being so dependent in this case with the energy sector. Advancing in the green transition, so promoting renewable energies, which in Spain we've been doing for a very long time, especially in the solar and eolic fields. Stepping up our efforts in the fight against climate change, which is a universal thing, and more measures for reduction of waste and microplastics. And later, promoting greater social and economic justice, and last but not least, strengthening European unity. So in this case, the theme again is all around Ukraine, and you could see that on July 1st, as soon as we assumed the presidency, Pedro Sánchez flew to Kiev, and he gave a speech to the Rada with Zelensky, and he was basically sending a strong message of support, saying that we're going to be here all the way, no matter what the cost may be and how long it may take. That was the message that he was trying to send to the Ukrainian people and to the European family. I personally, in terms of these 4 priorities, I personally like them because there's nothing that I could say that I'm against. But it's not about the measures itself, it's about how you execute them at the end of the day. And if they're executed properly, they're great measures. But let's not forget that Spain is going to have elections in 3 weeks, because we were supposed to have elections on December 10th, but Prime Minister Sánchez decided to call for early elections based on the terrible municipal election laws that he had 2 months ago in Spain. And now we're going to have to vote in 3 weeks in Spain, and we may have a new president, who may be Núñez Feijóo, the leader of the opposition from Partido Popular. And when he came in here, actually the other day on July 1st, when we assumed the presidency, we saw that Sánchez and Feijóo came over in case that there's a transition of power, because it's something that could easily happen. And I don't know if that has ever happened in the history of the EU, which is a quite interesting time to live, because it would be the shortest time with the current president. So we'll have to see, because maybe Feijóo will come in and change some of the measures. I honestly don't think so, because this is something that statesmen wouldn't do. Maybe, again, the way that those measures would be implemented would be slightly different, but overall the measures are good, and I really like them. And hopefully, as a Spaniard, as a European, I hope that my country will do a good job, and that we would leave a good legacy, because we won't have the presidency again in the next 13 years. So hopefully, I, as a Spanish citizen, I can just wish the very best for Prime Minister Sánchez, or for Feijóo in case that he gets elected as the new Prime Minister.
Thank you, Juan. And coming back to youth participation, upcoming EU elections, Mr. Campamenosi, do you think the European Parliament and EU institutions are doing enough to engage young people specifically in these upcoming elections, participating in voting, running for the seat?
I hope. Italy, for example, is a country where the participation to European elections is important. The political parties in Italy normally consider European elections as a moment to have an evaluation of their activity in the government or in the opposition. This time it will be different, because the press, the people is speaking about what the European institutions are doing regarding the new rules on the Green Deal, on other issues. And in some cases there is a debate, or people is not happy. For example, I'm not in favor of some of the proposals we are discussing on how far we are facing the transition. But of course, it's also thanks to the young people that we have also understood them. We, from the center-right conservative areas, have understood the importance of transition, for example, because maybe at the beginning we were not so open. So I think that this could be helpful. And to come back to Spain, this is also important. In my opinion, it will be important to have a semester with of presidency from a country which is a country of Mediterranean, because Mediterranean is a centrality in the debate. Too many times European institutions did not take care so much about what is happening in Mediterranean, and I don't mention only immigration, which is of course something relevant and important, but the fact that we need to collaborate and to create areas of development, exchange of goods, of culture, of everything, because in the past we have preferred to trade with countries which are so far from our continent, while we have everything so close to us. So the role of countries as Italy, Spain, and I hope also France, and Greece of course is doing that as well, is to bring Europe more close to the Mediterranean, and the young people, which is the people which is traveling more, knows already this. And I think Spain may help all of us to find these goals. Even if there will be a center-right government after the elections, but I'd be happy for that because I'm part of that. But even with a leftist government, I think this will be very important.
Thank you. And what also brings us here together is our concern for Jewish life in Europe and how we can ensure that the EU working plan to combat anti-Semitism would be implemented by the member states and that it will be successful. Juan, according to you, how do the young Europeans around you view the Jewish people and Israel today?
I would say that overall, unfortunately, the perception is not the best. It is interesting because when we see how the State of Israel was created, and this year we were commemorating the 75th year anniversary, we do see that the roots of Zionism were very much ingrained in the socialist movement. During 3 decades, Avodah, the Labor Party in Israel, was ruling for 30 years. And we saw that the European left and the youngsters, many of them, like for example, Vrei, who lived in a kibbutz, many of those people moved to a kibbutz. They wanted to see how Israel was, and they were hardcore Zionists. But we see that there's a major gap with my generation because many of those people who are more on the left, I would say, are very much anti-Zionist. They will always say that they're not anti-Semitic, that they're anti-Zionist, which to me, anti-Zionism is the new form of anti-Semitism, as Lord Rabbi Sachs put it once, which I completely agree with. But the main reason as to why they sympathize so much with the State of Israel is because of the current woke movement and the cancel culture that prevails, and we saw it clearly. This is coming all the way from the US at college campuses where I had the non-privilege of studying, and I could experience it myself, where some of my professors would openly say that Israel was a racist entity and an apartheid regime, openly. And it is very sad to see that many of those youngsters have bought that narrative, which is not true, because now it's all about sympathizing with the person, organization, country that suffers the most. It's all about emotions, instead of facts on the table. And no matter how many facts you may bring to the table as to what Israel stands for, such as that 20% of the population is not even Jewish, and it's Arab Israeli and enjoys the same equal rights as any other citizen, and many more, they will still say that Israel is the evil entity that we have to combat. And I really do hope that this will change eventually down the road. I think that it is very difficult because, as I said, we have a generation that has it all, but at the same time, it's a generation that complains about everything and that is hypersensitive. And I'm really hoping that this will change, that the mentality will change, and that it will be not something based on the right or on the left, but embracing Zionism as a non-Jew. As President Biden said a few months ago, you don't need to be a Jew in order to be a Zionist. And I'm really hoping that people on the right and on the left, especially the youth, will embrace the concept of Zionism and actually study what it actually means. Because many people still to this day don't know the definition of Zionism, and support a thriving Jewish life here and support the only democracy of the Middle East, which is Israel.
Thank you. And listening to this climate that Juan is describing in Europe, do you think EU is doing enough to address these issues? And can EU do something more to secure a future for young Jews like Juan?
I hope, because in some cases we have bad news, because to wear a kippah in some areas of French cities is an act of courage, because people may be in danger for that. And Europe, and France in particular, are the home of democracy, freedom of speech. It's thanks to the French Revolution that we speak about some kind of rights. But the impression is that our continent is having a period of communication which is not even true regarding what really happens in Israel. And this is something I don't like and I don't accept. I have many friends in the leftist side, but also in some cases in the right side, that are following issues which are not true at all. And we have to make a big effort in this case. And I try to do my best in this case, but even in these institutions, what it was not acceptable is, for example, that they have never accepted to have a debate in plenary regarding the outcome of the so-called Abraham's Accords, for which, when I've been in the Emirates a few months ago, I've met tourists from Israel. I went with them to the desert. I spoke with them regarding why they were there. Yes, now since 2 years there is the agreement, we can do that. They were not involved in politics, they did not care about political issues. And it's a pity that this parliament did not accept such a debate, because they did not like this agreement, while it's something which is helping countries to know each other more. And this is at the base of recognizing the other one. And this is at the base of facing racism. Secondly, there is another issue, the fact that in the past in Europe a problem for Jewish people was given by fascists, by Nazi, rightist extremists. Now we are facing more and more a problem from Islamists, which are betraying Islam. They are extremists as well. And this is something we cannot accept as Europeans. We have to do more and more. Thanks also to some Islamic people which attended our meetings, and thanks to the Abraham's Accord, are debating with all of us and helping all of us to have this solution. But we have not to consider that Holocaust is something that happened in the past, and we don't have responsibility about that. We have to fight for this every day.
Yes. Juan, according to an EU survey you probably know about, since you're working with these matters, almost 40% of the European Jews have considered leaving their home countries here in Europe because of the rising anti-Semitism. What about you? What are your future plans? Have you considered moving?
So that is the eternal dilemma that a Jew faces on the diaspora. Do I stay in the country of origin where I'm from, in this case, or in the European Union, or do I make Aliyah and I move to Israel? And every time, I was just in Israel recently, 2 weeks ago, for a work trip, and as I was walking the streets of Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim, I thought to myself, when am I going to make Aliyah? But then I'm back home, because to me, Belgium, Europe, France, Italy, every single country to me is home, because this is the beauty of being part of the European nation, of the European family. And I think, I love Europe. And this is what many people don't understand, that you can be, still to this day, because there's a lot of ignorance around Judaism, many people don't understand that you can be proud, in my case, to be Spanish, because I'm very proud, and that's the country of origin where I'm from, where my family lives, and at the same time, be extremely proud to be Jewish. And many people seem to not understand it. It's like you have to choose one or the other. And in my case, I think that some of us have to stay on the diaspora and unfortunately work against, I wish I didn't have to do this job, which is fighting anti-Semitism, but still we see it day after day, it's rising, it's skyrocketing, especially in countries like France that you mentioned before, which I completely agree with. Like, for example, now with the recent protests that are taking place all across France, you saw that the Holocaust memorial in the outskirts of Paris was vandalized. And you think to yourself, what does that have to do with the teenager that was, and of course, I'm totally gonna condemn the police brutality action that took place in this case. What does that have to do with fighting against that injustice? What does it have to do with it? Because I just don't understand what's the point of vandalizing something that you very well pointed, which is the Shoah. It took place only 80 years ago in the European soil. One third of the Jewish people was exterminated, massacred all across Europe in concentration camps and in gas chambers 80 years ago. So it is our moral duty as Jews, as non-Jews, as human beings, to commemorate what happened. And in this case, I'm hopeful. We'll see what the future holds. But in my case, I'm very happy and proud to live in Europe, to work in the EU quarter, in the EU institutions. And I think it is very necessary, because otherwise anti-Semitism would skyrocket even more. And unfortunately, some of us have to stay here doing that work, because if we all move to Israel, this is my personal perception, but I think that anti-Semitism would get even worse. And of course, I've considered it. Many of my friends in France, in particular, they've made Aliyah, and the population in France is unfortunately decreasing year after year. And in countries like Belgium and the UK, it's also getting really bad. But I'm very lucky, because in my country, I have to say, when I walk down the streets of where I'm from, Mallorca or Madrid, Barcelona, and I wear my kippah very proudly in my Magen David, I haven't faced a single situation of anti-Semitism, and I really do hope that it stays that way, because obviously it can happen anywhere. But the way to combat against that is to normalize being Jewish. And in my case, many of my friends would say otherwise, that you have to live a Jewish life in your private circles. I disagree with that, because in order to fight against anti-Semitism, we first need to come out and say that we're here to stay. This is our home. We've been here for 2,000 years. We're very proud to call ourselves Europeans. We're loyals. It's a halachic principle to be loyal to the country where you're from. And it's not incompatible with being extremely proud to be Jewish.
And thank you for your courage and your activism, being here in Europe and standing up for your community and all the work that the European Jewish Association does. Does Europe have any responsibility for having 40% of its Jews considering to leave?
Yes, sure, because of what we told before, but also because we have to consider that Jewish people in Europe are Europeans, are not guests, are not friends coming to see our continent. They are part of our culture. It's a pity indeed that when we worked to new treaties before 2009, many countries in Europe did not accept to mention the importance of Christian and Jewish roots in our continent, despite the fact that any one of us may consider himself a Christian or Jewish or whatever. But it's a pity that we did not put this, which could be a symbol, no? Could be something, how to say, not relevant for actual laws or rules and the way people live. But I think it would have been important because, of course, society is complex and to understand what happens in this world is very complicated. But I think we have to engage ourselves more and more in order to keep Europe a comfortable place for everyone, despite their thought, despite their religion, despite